My father gave bunch of money to a girl he met on Uber in just 2 months, believing she loved him, only to realize too late that he was being manipulated and used. My dad has always been the kind of man people would describe as soft-hearted. To a fault. He never had much, never built savings, and his credit was always shaky at best, but he believed deeply in kindness. If someone needed a ride, he'd drive them for free. If a neighbor needed help with groceries, he'd cover it, even if it meant skipping something for himself. After retiring from his old job, he started driving Uber, mostly because he hated sitting at home alone. A little cash, but mostly good stories and people to talk to, he would say with a smile. One night, during one of those rides, everything changed. He picked up a young woman, barely 21, who looked like she'd been through hell. She wore an oversized coat that clearly wasn't hers, her hair pulled into a messy knot, and her eyes carried the kind of exhaustion you don't usually see in someone that young. She didn't wait for small talk. As soon as the door shut, she said quietly, almost like a confession, "I don't have anywhere to go tonight. I've been bouncing between couches and sometimes just sleeping outside." That was all it took for my dad's heart to crack wide open. He listened, nodded, and by the end of the ride, he was no longer just her driver. He was her savior. He told me later that something about her reminded him of the daughter he wished he still had at home, and that he just couldn't drop her off and let her suffer. That very night, he paid for her motel room out of his own pocket. When I found out, I confronted him. "Dad, you just met this girl. You don't know her. Are you sure this is smart?" He waved me off with a look that mixed irritation and sincerity. "Son, what kind of man would I be if I turned away someone who's homeless? If I can help even a little, why wouldn't I?" At first, I thought it was just one of his random acts of generosity. A night in a motel, a warm meal, maybe a few bucks until she could figure herself out. But it didn't stop there. The very next day, he helped her land a job interview at a local cafe. By the end of the week, he was talking about getting her back on her feet and even hinted that he might help her buy a car. What unsettled me most wasn't just the speed of it all, but the way he talked about her. My dad, the man who used to roll his eyes at romance movies, who constantly told me not to believe everything people say, was suddenly speaking with this wide-eyed belief that this girl had walked into his life for a reason. It wasn't just generosity anymore. It was obsession disguised as compassion. Watching him that week, I felt a knot forming in my stomach. My father had known her for less than 48 hours, and already, it felt like she had him wrapped around her little finger. Deep down, I had a gut feeling. This was the beginning of something dangerous, and I wasn't sure I'd be able to stop it. Within weeks, what started as a single motel stay turned into something much larger and far more alarming. My dad wasn't just helping her get on her feet anymore. He was investing in her like she was his second chance at family, at love, at purpose. First came the motel. Then, he started covering her meals. Then, when she told him the bus routes were unreliable and dangerous late at night, he decided she needed a car. A car. Not a beat-up junker to tide her over, but something newer, something safe. He signed for it, covered the payments. And when I raised my eyebrows, he muttered something about how everyone deserves the tools to succeed. I tried to remind him of his own financial reality. "Dad, you can't even keep your own bills straight half the time. Your credit score is in the 300s. You don't have the money for this." He didn't even flinch. "Don't worry about me. This is different. You'll see. She appreciates it." But appreciation quickly turned into expectation, whether he wanted to admit it or not. Over the next 2 months, he gave her, by his own proud admission, nearly $20,000. Here's the part that makes my blood boil. He didn't have $20,000. That wasn't money lying around in savings. That wasn't an inheritance, a lottery ticket, or a business success. That was him draining what little cushion he had, maxing out credit cards, and, worst of all, borrowing money from me under false pretenses. He once called me, saying he needed a few thousand to catch up on overdue bills. I handed it over because he's my dad, because I thought I was helping him survive. Only later did I find out it went straight into her pockets. The worst irony? He swore she never asked him for anything. "She doesn't want money, son. She never asks." That's how I know she's genuine. I'm the one offering because I want to see her thrive. And yet, cars, hotels, food, Endless little expenses somehow piled up until he was drowning. Meanwhile, red flags were popping up everywhere. Friends of hers reached out to my dad. Even her ex's mother called, telling him outright that she was still involved with her ex and was using him for cash. But every time, he brushed it off like swatting a fly. They're just jealous. They see how happy we are. They don't want her to succeed. I remember staring at him one night across his kitchen table, noticing the fresh tattoo on his arm, her name, etched forever into his skin after just a few weeks of knowing her. My 60-year-old father, who once lectured me about thinking with my brain instead of my heart, was now acting like a teenager blinded by first love that I wanted to shake him, to scream, to force him to see what was happening. But he looked at me with such stubborn conviction that I realized the truth. Logic wasn't going to pull him out of this. He was in deep, maybe too deep already. The car became the symbol of everything wrong. At first, Dad proudly showed it off, telling me how it was going to change her life. She'll finally have stability, he said, smiling like he'd just done the noblest thing in the world. But stability never came. Within days, the car started disappearing. Sometimes she'd vanish for hours, sometimes days, and Dad would panic like a parent waiting for a runaway kid to call home. More than once, he actually involved the police to track it down. Imagine that. My 60-year-old father, sitting in a police station, explaining how his girlfriend borrowed a car he bought her and just didn't come back. Each time, the police found it. Each time, Dad brought it home like he was rescuing a child from a bad neighborhood. And each time, she somehow talked her way back into his good graces until the last time. That was the breaking point. At least, it should have been. She convinced him to sign it over to her officially. He walked into the DMV and legally transferred ownership of a car that cost him thousands to a 21-year-old he had known for barely 2 months. He didn't even tell me until after the fact that I confronted him, and it turned into a screaming match. Dad, she's playing you. You've called the cops on her 3 times. She disappears with your money, your car, your credit cards. What more do you need to see? But he didn't see it. He didn't want to. His face turned red, his voice shook with frustration, and he said the words that cut me the most. You don't understand. She's the only one who cares about me. That sentence echoed in my head for days. Because buried inside the lie was a truth I couldn't ignore. My dad was lonely. He'd been divorced for years, living paycheck to paycheck, never remarried, never rebuilt his social life. He drove Uber not just for money, but for conversation. When this girl came along, young and pretty and full of sob stories, she gave him the one thing no one else had in years, attention. And attention, for him, felt like love to so even when her friends called him to warn he was being used. Even when her ex's mother literally told him she was still with her ex, he refused to believe it. He built this story in his head where they were a team, fighting against the world. And anyone who doubted her was just another villain trying to keep them apart. I sat there one night, staring at him across the table. His arm was bare, his sleeve rolled up, and that tattoo of her name stared back at me like an accusation. He had branded himself for her, permanently, and I realized, with a pit in my stomach, I might not be able to save him from this. After the car fiasco, things between us started to spiral. I couldn't look at my dad without feeling this mix of anger, sadness, and helplessness. Every conversation turned into a fight. He'd bring her up like she was the answer to all his problems, and I'd push back, reminding him of the $20,000 already gone, the car signed over, the tattoo that screamed desperation. At one point, I called out the loans he'd taken from me. Dad, you lied to me. You said it was for bills, for groceries, for keeping up with the house. But it all went straight to her. How can you stand there and tell me she's not using you? His face hardened. He crossed his arms and gave me this look like I was the enemy. You're supposed to have my back. You don't know her like I do. That sentence stung. Because I did know her. Not personally, but through every story, every bank withdrawal, every tear-filled excuse she fed him. And the worst part? Everyone else knew too. Friends had told him. Her own ex's mom had told him. But he only heard her voice. My sister, and I tried to stage a mini intervention. We sat him down at the kitchen table, photos and receipts spread out like we were prosecutors building a case. We pointed to the numbers, the red marks on his credit score, the loan paperwork he hadn't even read before signing. We begged him to think about his future, about how he was throwing away what little stability he had left that he didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Instead, he leaned back, shook his head, and muttered, "You guys just don't want me to be happy." That broke something in me. Because deep down, I realized that as much as I wanted to save him, he didn't want saving. He was clinging to this girl like a drowning man clings to driftwood, even if the driftwood is dragging him out to sea. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, torn in two directions. Do I keep fighting, keep screaming until he finally listens? Or do I step back, let him crash, and be there to help him pick up the wreckage? Neither option felt right. Both felt like losing. And in that moment, I understood what helpless truly means. The fallout from my dad's choices came faster than any of us expected. Bills started piling up on his kitchen counter, credit card statements with balances that made my stomach twist, overdue notices stamped in bold red, even letters from collection agencies. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing, and every time I glanced at the caller ID, it was another bank, another debt collector. One afternoon, I stopped by unannounced and found him at the table, staring at a stack of papers like they were written in another language. His face was pale, his hands shaking slightly as he held a bill. When I asked what it was, he admitted it was the second notice for his mortgage. He'd been so wrapped up in helping her that he'd missed 2 payments. And yet, when I brought up cutting ties with her, he snapped, "Don't you dare blame her for this. She never asked for anything. I offered. I wanted to." His voice cracked on that last part, but his stubbornness was impenetrable. Meanwhile, she was living her best life. New clothes, flashy jewelry, nights out posted all over social media. I don't even use Instagram much, but my cousin showed me her account. It was like watching my dad's money parade around in selfies. He refused to believe it. He swore she was misunderstood, that people were twisting things to make her look bad. The breaking point came when his car got repossessed. He had been so busy funneling money into her life that he'd let his own loan slip through the cracks. I still remember the sound of the tow truck pulling out of the driveway, my dad yelling at the driver while neighbors peeked through blinds. He called me that night, his voice hollow, and for the first time, I heard fear instead of denial. But even then, he didn't let go of her. He framed it as just another obstacle, something they'd get through together. It was almost surreal, watching him lose piece after piece of his stability, yet hold tighter to the very person dragging him down to that point. I wasn't just worried about his finances. I was scared for his health, his sanity. Because it wasn't just money he was losing. It was his grip on reality. The money was bad enough. But what scared me most was how my dad himself was changing. This wasn't the man I grew up with, the guy who used to make dumb jokes during family dinners, who taught me how to ride a bike, who used to lecture me about being careful with credit cards. Now, he barely spoke unless it was about her. His whole personality seemed to orbit around this 21-year-old. He'd bring her up in every conversation, like she was some miracle who had finally given his life meaning. If anyone even hinted that she might be using him, his expression would harden. I lost count of how many times he told me, "You don't know her like I do. She's been through so much. She just needs someone who won't abandon her." Meanwhile, he was abandoning people, his own family. My sister stopped calling him altogether after he accused her of being jealous of the girl. Holidays became awkward. He didn't show up for Thanksgiving for the first time in my life. When I asked why, he mumbled something about her not wanting to be around people who judged her. I could see the toll it was taking. He'd lost weight, his clothes hanging off him like he'd forgotten how to eat. His hands shook constantly, not just from stress, but probably from skipping meals to save every last dollar for her. His laugh, once booming and ridiculous, was gone. The worst moment came late one night when he called me, sounding broken. He said he sometimes wondered if maybe everyone would be better off without him. I froze. My father, my stubborn, larger-than-life dad, was talking like he had nothing left to live for, except her. It wasn't just about finances anymore. She had gotten inside his head so deeply that his identity was unraveling. He wasn't just losing money. He was losing himself, and I started to realize, if this went on much longer, I might not just lose my dad's savings or his house. I might lose my dad permanently to some point. Watching from the sidelines wasn't an option anymore. My sister and I sat down and agreed. We had to do something before this girl completely hollowed him out. We reached out to one of his closest friends, a guy he'd known since high school, and the three of us planned a kind of intervention. Nothing dramatic, just a conversation to remind him that he had people who cared about him. That we met him at his favorite diner, hoping the familiar place might soften him up. At first, it was almost normal. He cracked a joke about the pancakes being smaller than they used to be. And for a second, I thought maybe the old dad was still in there. But then we brought up the reason we'd asked him to meet. Dad, I started carefully. We're worried about you. About the money, the lies, the way you're shutting people out. This isn't you. He stiffened instantly. His friend tried to chime in, reminding him of the time they nearly lost their apartments in their 20s because of reckless spending. My sister, holding back tears, begged him to stop before he ruined his life. But instead of hearing concern, he heard betrayal. His face flushed red, and he slammed his coffee cup so hard it sloshed across the table. You're all against me. Every single one of you. You don't know her. You don't see how much she cares about me. We tried to reason with him, mentioning the police reports, the ex-boyfriend's mom, the money trail. He wouldn't budge. In his eyes, we weren't his family. We were enemies trying to rip away the one person he believed loved him. Then he said something that cut deeper than I could have imagined. If you can't accept her, then maybe I don't need you in my life. Silence fell over the table. My sister broke down crying. His friend leaned back, shaking his head in disbelief. I just sat there, stunned, realizing that my dad had chosen a 21-year-old stranger over the people who had been with him his entire life. That we walked out of that diner defeated. Instead of pulling him back, we had pushed him even closer to her. And as much as it broke my heart, I started to fear that nothing, not logic, not love, not even evidence, was going to wake him up. After the failed intervention, things only escalated. My dad pulled away from us completely, almost like we had been erased from his life. He stopped coming to family dinners, ignored phone calls, and when he did answer, it was usually just to snap at us or defend her. We later found out he had started selling off personal items to keep up with her needs. His old record collection, the one he used to swear he'd never part with, disappeared one week. Then the tools he kept neatly organized in the garage, gone. Even the watch my late grandfather had given him, a family heirloom, ended up pawned. All of it drained away for this girl who supposedly never asked for anything. One night, I drove past his apartment on a gut feeling. His car was gone, and the lights inside were out, but I could see him sitting in the dark by the window. No TV on, no music playing, just him staring blankly outside. It didn't look like a man in love. It looked like a man crumbling. What made it worse was hearing from neighbors that she had practically moved in. They described her coming and going at all hours, sometimes bringing other people with her, sometimes yelling at my dad loud enough that the whole floor could hear. Yet, the next morning, he would be outside with a smile plastered on his face, insisting to anyone who asked that things were amazing. The final straw came when he called me out of the blue, asking for money again. This time, I didn't play along. I asked directly if it was for her. He denied it, but his voice cracked, and I knew instantly. When I refused, he exploded, accusing me of being heartless, selfish, ungrateful. That was the moment it hit me. This girl didn't just have control of his wallet. She had control of him. And unless something gave, we were about to watch him lose everything, including himself. It wasn't long before the inevitable happened. With his savings already gone, his credit cards maxed out, and most of his valuables sold, my dad turned to payday loans. He borrowed against his future, signing contracts with ridiculous interest rates that guaranteed he'd be drowning in debt. For years, every penny went straight to her. Hotels, gifts, emergencies that seemed to pop up every other day. I started receiving calls from debt collectors who had tracked my number down because he had listed me as a reference. That was how I discovered just how deep he had fallen. He owed thousands, more than he could ever realistically pay back. And yet he acted as if it was all temporary, that things would turn around once she got on her feet. The most painful moment came when I visited him and saw eviction notices piled up by his door. His landlord had already given him multiple warnings, but instead of facing reality, he shrugged and told me not to worry. She's worth it, he said, almost dreamily, like a teenager in love instead of a 60-year-old man about to lose the roof over his head. His health started to show the strain, too. He looked thinner, his skin pale, his hands trembling from stress and lack of proper meals. Yet he still smiled whenever she texted, dropping everything to run to her side, as if that tiny spark of attention made up for the ruin surrounding him. Watching him destroy himself piece by piece felt like standing by while someone slowly set fire to their own house, and all I could do was watch the flames spread higher. After weeks of watching my dad spiral, my siblings and I decided it was time to intervene. We sat him down one evening, trying to approach the situation calmly, but the tension in the room was palpable. I explained, carefully, how the girl had manipulated him and how much financial damage had already been done. He listened quietly at first, nodding occasionally, but when we mentioned taking legal or financial steps, his eyes flashed with anger. "You don't understand," he said, voice trembling. "She's different. She's special. She wouldn't do this if she didn't care about me." My siblings exchanged looks, exasperated, while I fought the rising frustration in my chest. We tried showing him messages, screenshots, and even the claims from her ex-boyfriend that she was still involved with him. Yet my dad dismissed everything as jealousy or misinterpretation, convinced that everyone was against the two of them. The argument lasted hours. Voices were raised, tears shed, and the room filled with a mixture of pleading, disappointment, and fear. I could see the stubbornness etched deep in him, a mix of loneliness and hope keeping him blind. For a moment, I wondered if anything we said could reach him or if the damage had already gone too far by the end of the night. We left with heavy hearts, unsure if our efforts had done any good at all. His belief in her seemed unshakable, a fortress built from 2 months of deception, leaving us powerless yet determined to find another way to protect him. Over the next few days, the situation escalated even further. My dad started taking out small personal loans, claiming they were investments in their future together. He began buying her more expensive gifts, even a designer handbag she had casually mentioned in passing, as if he could read her mind. Each transaction drained him more, but he was convinced he was building a life of love and loyalty. That I tried calling him, sending messages, and even dropping by unannounced, hoping to catch him in a moment of clarity. He always seemed elated, speaking about her with an intensity that was both unsettling and heartbreaking. She, in contrast, remained aloof, often brushing off my attempts to speak, smiling sweetly at my dad while subtly manipulating his emotions. At one point, I found out she had convinced him to co-sign on a small car loan for her, despite his already poor credit. My stomach sank. The numbers didn't lie. He was sinking fast, and her influence over him was absolute. I felt a mix of anger, fear, and helplessness, wondering how much further he would go before the financial and emotional consequences became irreversible. Despite all this, he continued to insist she loved him, that she was the one, and that the world just didn't understand their connection. It was surreal, like watching someone step repeatedly into quicksand while smiling and calling it solid ground. Eventually, friends and family couldn't stay silent any longer. They began calling my dad repeatedly, trying to warn him about her motives. "She's using you," they said. "She's not serious about you. She's just taking advantage." He would politely nod, smile, and dismiss their concerns, insisting they were jealous or judgmental. Her ex's mother reached out directly, sharing details of how manipulative and controlling she had been in her previous relationship. My dad refused to listen, claiming the woman only wanted to bring negativity into their lives. Even I tried sitting down with him, showing him bank statements, messages, and evidence of her lies, but every piece of proof seemed to strengthen his conviction that she loved him genuinely. It became a constant tension in the household. Arguments erupted, with my dad defending her fiercely while I tried desperately to reason with him. It was exhausting, emotionally draining, and incredibly frustrating. Each warning felt like shouting into a void, each attempt at intervention met with denial and insistence that he was making the right choice. Still, a small part of me clung to hope that, eventually, reality would seep through, that perhaps he would wake up before losing everything. But the cracks in his judgment were widening rapidly. In just 2 months, my dad had gone from casual generosity to full-blown symbolic gestures. The most shocking was the tattoo he got, of her name on his arm. He showed it off proudly, saying it was a permanent mark of love and devotion. Every time I saw it, I felt my stomach twist in disbelief, He also bought her a brand new car, even though he didn't have the savings for it. And the act wasn't just a gift, it was a declaration. She asked for help with paperwork for ownership transfers multiple times, and despite repeated advice to be cautious, he signed everything over. Even the small acts, paying for her meals, booking hotel rooms, covering work-related expenses, were like pieces of a puzzle that painted a picture of total surrender to her influence. Family dinners, usually relaxed, became tense and awkward. Conversations shifted from mundane topics to the ever-growing list of her requests and his unwavering compliance. Everyone tried to stay polite, but the fear in their eyes was evident. They could see him losing himself for someone who likely didn't care at all. This combination of financial, emotional, and symbolic commitment made it almost impossible for him to recognize the situation for what it truly was. He was in too deep, and every loving gesture from him seemed to fuel her manipulation even further. By this point, multiple people in our family and social circle were desperate to step in. I tried countless times to talk to him calmly, showing him screenshots, receipts, and even texts from her friends warning him she was still involved with her ex. Each attempt ended with him dismissing our concerns as jealousy or misunderstandings. His friends also weighed in, some bluntly, telling him he was being used and that the relationship was unhealthy. Yet, he laughed it off, insisting they didn't understand love or the bond they shared. Even when her ex's mother reached out, pleading for him to reconsider, he brushed it off, claiming she was simply trying to interfere. He began making excuses for her every behavior, delays, demands, and even small lies. According to him, everything was innocent or misinterpreted. It was as if his entire perception of reality had been altered. No matter the evidence, he filtered it through the lens of devotion and hope. The tension grew at family gatherings. I could feel eyes darting between him and me, silently pleading for him to listen. But each time he smiled and reassured everyone that he was happy and loved. The frustration and helplessness we felt were overwhelming as we watched him willingly spiral deeper into a situation that was almost certainly doomed. It all reached a boiling point when he decided to co-sign a lease for her apartment, despite having very little money left and a mounting list of unpaid bills. The entire family was in shock. This wasn't just financial irresponsibility anymore. It was total disregard for his own stability. I confronted him again, this time raising my voice, showing him the bank statements, the borrowed money from me, and the receipts for everything he had spent on her. His reaction was a mix of anger and disbelief. "You don't get it. She's not after my money. She loves me," he shouted, shaking his head as if we were all conspirators against their love. My attempts to reason with him fell on deaf ears. Meanwhile, her behavior became more manipulative. She demanded expensive dinners, new clothes, and frequent rides, always framing it as we spending time together. It became painfully clear to the rest of us that she was leveraging his generosity, yet he remained oblivious. This was the moment I realized that stepping back might be safer than constantly clashing. Intervening aggressively only pushed him closer to her, reinforcing his belief that everyone was against them. We decided to monitor the situation cautiously, ready to help pick up the pieces if and when it finally collapsed. Inevitably, his financial situation started to unravel. Credit card companies began calling relentlessly, and overdue notices piled up at his door. He had no savings to fall back on, and borrowing more money became impossible. The reality of the situation hit him slowly, like a cold wave he couldn't escape. Meanwhile, she grew bolder, pushing boundaries further with each passing day. One night, she convinced him to take out another small loan under the pretense of covering unexpected bills for her. He signed without hesitation, still convinced it was love, still denying any possibility of being used. Our family could only watch in frustration and heartbreak. Every warning, every attempt to intervene seemed futile. The trust we had in his judgment was shattered, and we feared the emotional toll this relationship would have on him. Yet, there was a quiet, underlying hope that he would eventually see the truth and regain control over his life. Eventually, reality hit him hard. The accumulated debts, the constant stress from creditors, and the undeniable manipulations became impossible to ignore. He realized that the woman he thought loved him had been using him for money from the start. It was painful and humiliating, but also liberating to see the truth. He began taking steps to regain control, selling items he could part with, consolidating debts, and cutting off all contact with her. While the betrayal stung, he discovered a renewed sense of independence and resilience. The family stepped in to help rebuild his life, offering guidance and support, but ultimately, it was his own determination that mattered most. Looking back, he understood how easy it was to be charmed and misled when loneliness and desire cloud judgment. The experience left him wiser, more cautious, but not bitter. He learned the hard way that love and trust must be earned, not assumed. And while he lost money, he gained clarity, strength, and a renewed ability to protect himself and his future.